and raised in South Philadelphia at a young age. Had me on street corners in Philadelphia selling produce, Christmas trees, Mother's Day flowers, you name it, since I was young. And fast forward in the 90s is when I went to college, Brian. So that was before the internet was invented, right? So it wasn't as easy to do your research and figure things out. So when I pursued my career in college, I wanted to get a degree in sales and found out that they don't do that. And fast forward, ended up with a degree in health and human development and short of a minor in business. Started working for Anheuser-Busch and learned a lot. Great company. Transitioned into Florida, didn't know a soul, and picked up and left and went down there. And that's where I really started my career. And then in the last 11 and a half years, have been in the Austin, Texas area.
Cool. And what are you selling today?
I work for a company by the name of BioLase, and we manufacture in the U.S. and sell lasers for dentistry. We have over 350 patents on lasers, and not all of those are used in dentistry, but we treat our core competency in dentistry.
So are you selling to the dentist, or are you selling to a business owner?
To the dentist. And most of the time, if you're not familiar with dentistry, they are the business owner.
Yeah. They're not easy people to get to see unless you're a paying customer, though, right?
Sometimes that can be challenging, especially when we're selling something they don't necessarily need. Most of them want it, but that want need, analogy that we use a lot in sales really comes into play with what we do, because it's a disruptive.
And so how do you handle that obstacle?
Well, education and relationship. Dentistry happens to be in healthcare one of the strongest peer-to-peer influencing from a decision-making standpoint. So coaching the teams to be able to sell at a higher level, really it's just about being able to get access, being able to have the opportunity to educate and leverage the relationships that we've already built and be able to capitalize on that. That's the 50,000 foot view. And that's probably the correct answer, Brian. But, when you're in the trenches, things change, right?
Right. So how do you get that done? I mean, that does sound nice, but,
yeah.
Because people who look at it as education, that's not what it is, right? It's like they're not hiring you to learn. They're hiring you to solve a business problem, right?
Of course. So then you get into the classic challenger sale and solutions-based selling. So here's where the challenge lies. And I learned this a long time ago. Nothing I'm saying today I'm going to claim as my own, because I've learned a lot from people like yourself, and hopefully others can learn from the things that I've learned. But we call this, at least within my team, we call it the blue football, right? We ask them what their favorite color is and what their favorite sport is, and they tell us, and we focus there, right? So it's sharpshooting versus shotgun blast, right?
Yeah.
For those in the Midwest can relate to that pretty well.
So how do you size up a dentist to find out if they're a good match? Because I'm sure there's cheap dentists, and then there's the cutting edge dentists. And when I do visit a dentist, they sure do like a lot of toys.
Yeah, some of them do. And you'd be surprised. Some of our best customers are out in, what we jokingly call the boondocks, right?
Yeah.
And they end up needing to be the Swiss Army knife of dentistry, because they don't have specialists close by. People in those type of suburbia areas, trust is more important. They don't want to drive an hour, right, to go see someone else too. And going through healthcare, regardless if it's dentistry or not, a lot of people, and yourself, when you go to see your doctor, the bad news isn't necessarily a diagnosis. It's, I can't treat what you have, go somewhere else. And then you go there, and then it's just, you feel like you're in this kicking the can down the road. And in these instances, these dentists thrive because they immerse themselves in the education to understand what they can do. So they do more comprehensive work. And some of the best dentists, in terms of their revenue that they produce, as well as the dentistry that they're doing for patients, it's hit or miss. You could find the best dentists in the world could be in Beverly Hills, or they can be in popular Bluff, Missouri.
Yeah.
right in the middle of nowhere.
And what have you learned along the way? What separates you from just an okay sales guy?
Well, humility, I think, is probably a trait that a lot of people do not embrace enough, because I'll never stop trying to learn and
Yeah.
think that I have already learned everything I need to know. So it's an every day, every minute, every week, every quarter, right, battle to make sure that we're pivoting our strategy while not changing course, right? What I mean by that is, if our strategy is to go north, then nobody better go south, right? You can go northeast and northwest and pivot slightly, but we need to all be on the same page, moving in the right direction. But sometimes we need to change. I'll give you a perfect example. 5 years ago, 80% of our sales came from existing. That meant someone was buying a second unit or upgrading, right? In the last 5 years, we pivoted our strategy, and now 80% of our sales are to new customers. Someone that's never owned a laser. Right now, less than 10% of all the dentists in the United States own an all tissue laser. So 9%. That means that 9 out of every 10 calls, right, or door knocks is an opportunity.
And what's the hardest part of your job?
The hardest part of the job is when I finally get, and this is going to be a little bit different than what you've heard, when I finally get someone to say yes, one of the first things they say is, with the benefit of hindsight, I don't know why I waited this long. So how do we continue to think about why? Simon Sinek's real big on the why, right? And why people wait as long as they do. So I attribute what we're doing. We are the LASIK salesman before LASIK was standard of care. So if I'm going to a dentist, or let's just keep it in that category, I'm going to an ophthalmologist and I'm telling them, stop doing eye surgery with a scalpel, because your patients will say yes to more treatment and you'll be able to be more precise, minimally invasive. Well, they've learned how to do that for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. That behavior change. And if we think we can just go in there and change everyone's behavior overnight, it's not the case, right? It's continuing to think outside of the box about why people don't move forward and what takes them so long to make a decision, so we can do better next time.
Have you unwound that and figured it out? Or
I think so. What's really unique, what I've learned a lot, is in disruptive technology, what I've learned is that the majority of our audience doesn't understand enough to make an educated decision. They think they know a lot. So now we're the sales guy trying to be the professional and do the education, but yet we're the sales guy, right? So they don't want to believe everything we have to say. So there's that delicate balance between pushing the envelope on standard of care and what they're already used to. So one of the things, aside from ROI, besides minimally invasive patient care and all the disruptive technologies fall into the bucket, it's understanding one of the biggest obstacles I think a lot of us have missed, especially early in my career, is, does this disrupt my daily flow? Is it hard to use? Will my staff hate it or like it, right? It's not always about the money. It's not always about, does it work? Because you can invest $1 million in the best study in the world and says this device or drug works and people still won't buy it. And we're changing how we're doing the training piece. So we're leading with education and training to show them what the integration path looks like versus doing it post-sale.
Yeah, because the selling why now is the real sale. I think, the product works. It makes business sense. They've got the money.
Yes.
What doesn't make sense? I've got to change. There's a little disruption. I'm uncomfortable.
Yep. And there it goes back to the blue football, right? What's important to them, and focus there. Because if you have a product that does a lot of different things, you can't get caught sending someone to the restaurant with 100 buffet line item and telling them to make their decision, right? They start to look and think. And as you know, logic and emotional brains will find more reasons why not to do something than to do something.
Yeah. And have you found anything to get around that? Is it, what worked for me was you basically just do it and get paid later.
Yeah. Some of it's investment, right, into that time frame or the logic behind how to get things done. So there's definitely a balance. If I figured it out, I'd already be in the Caribbean, Brian. So no, I have not figured that out yet.
Well, I mean, it reminds me, Verizon's trying to get me to switch internet providers.
Mm-hmm.
They're cheaper, the quality's better, and it's faster. So why don't I do it?
But what do you have to do in order to switch?
Well, that's it. I've got probably at least a day of downtime.
Right? You have to change. You have to fill out paperwork. You have to do things that you don't like, right?
Well, my business is on the internet. So no internet means no business.
Right.
so
then why aren't they solving for that?
Right. They don't address that.
Now, so why did people start leaving Netflix back in the day when they stopped mailing DVDs?
There was a change.
I don't know.
I don't know how would they do it online? How can they fit that DVD through the cable?
They figured out that the risk, right? But they figured out that the risk of whatever the percentage was of people that wanted to have a mail-in DVD was a whole lot less than the ones like me that started with it day one and saw the value, right? Yeah. So it's how do you connect to the majority of the audience?
Yeah. Now, are you in a leadership role or are you an individual contributor? You're in leadership.
Yep. I'm the senior USA sales director for the company.
And how was that transition for you from being a great rep to now being a leader?
So thank you for saying I was a great rep. I guess that's...
I'm reading your profile.
Yeah. I wouldn't have gotten to here, I guess, if I wasn't. It's worked out really well. And I hesitate only because, Brian, when you're a top 3 rep in a company, when they ask you to go to management, that's usually less, right? So a lot of people are like, oh, I don't do that. So they gave me a unique opportunity early on in my career here to be able to balance both because they needed someone to step up in leadership role. So at the time, the CEO gave me the opportunity to basically be a player coach. Yeah. I just didn't realize at the time, because I was already helping the rest of the team. I just didn't realize at the time that I was going to actually fall in love with it and really like to lead others. My DNA profile is very hands-on. So I did not want to take myself away from being in the trenches with the team. So what's unique is the co-travel, going out there with them and selling with them still satisfies that need, right, that I have embedded in me. But I really like to watch people grow and do better. You know, they were in the bottom 10% as a rep, and within 6 months, they're number 2, number 3. And I really take a lot of pride in that. So that's my fuel.
And how did you get that transformation to take place from bottom 10 to doing well?
Great question. It's not a formula that works for everyone. And the formula isn't the same. So, you know the difference between baking and cooking, right? Yeah. I'm not a good baker. If you told me go bake this cake without the instructions, it's not going to taste good, right? You have to put this certain amount of sugar, this certain amount of flour, go cook. I can watch and touch and see how things are transgressing as they go and be able to pivot and shift accordingly. So I can cook, I can't bake. So, and I think that's relative to sales, that analogy. If we go out there with a 2-page check this box and go out there and everybody will be successful, all we'll do is create robots and they'll have no sense of identity, right? And I fear that that's what happens in some sales organizations. I make a point to not allow that to happen within hours so that everybody has their own purpose, but we're all moving in that same direction. So to answer your question bluntly, it's understanding people's personalities and what's in their DNA, what's their strength, right? I'll use this story, and I won't say the company, but I was reprimanded a long time ago, early in my career, for being the lowest person in the company to ever order brochures. So let me repeat that.
you rascal.
For brochures, right? I mean,
how do you get away with this stuff?
Right. I mean, 350 salespeople, and I'm at the bottom for ordering brochures, but I'm at the top.
You're not using the marketing materials properly.
Yeah. Well, I think about that and I say, well, why are we worried about that? Right. So how do I take my management style and learn what I've learned from? And listen, Brian, you've probably learned from some where you were younger and said, I don't know if that was a good boss or not. Later on, you're like, wow, I learned a lot. and you appreciate it. Sometimes you look back and thought they were great, but they didn't challenge you, right? So it's that balance on how to take something that's inside of someone and bringing it out and watching it grow.
Yeah. And how do you tell? I mean, because I'm sure you have lots of reps, some you hired, some you inherited, some transfer in, some move around. How do you assess them?
Well, there's lots of ways to do that. I jokingly call them the personality disorder tests, right? So Gallup, Brooks profiles, right? There's a ton of them out there. So you look at that. So data points. But I will tell you that, do you ever interview someone and on paper, they just look fantastic? But they're face to face and you're like, what? This just isn't translating. What's wrong here, right? So I call that going with your gut. So when we're out in the field and I watch someone's behavior, how they introduce themselves on a cold call, let's say, and I watch how they interact and I watch how they, talk about the value proposition, sometimes they're too nervous about how to sound good instead of just being a human being, right?
Yeah.
And I think hand-to-hand combat, being out there with them and helping that confidence and getting that, momentum down is probably more valuable than anything, right? Because I just interviewed someone recently and we grabbed lunch during the interview, great interview. And I asked the waiter one very simple question. What's the best burger on the menu? So I would assume he already knew, hey, I want to get a burger. And he went into a 5-minute conversation about chicken sandwiches. After he walked away, the interviewee,
you knew a lot about chicken.
The interviewee, the last question they asked right before the waiter came up was, hey, what's the challenge out there in the field? And I was like, there's the example right there. It's not listening and understanding, right? There's that old proverb, listen, understand before you reply. And I apply that quite often. As salespeople, we all tend to talk more than we want to listen. And I know you probably heard this from a lot of people. And I may have stolen this from someone, but I use an acronym because it was easier for me when I was a kid in school. And I call it APURE, APURE, acknowledge, probe, to understand before you reply. And if we always think about that, acknowledge the issue, what is it, get that out of the way, right? Because then you got the rest of the time of the meeting to recover, right? And then if you acknowledge the issue, then they're telling you what they need and they want or why they're not going to buy, right? And then you got the last 25 minutes or the 30 minutes to talk about it. And I think a lot of people fail at that. They're too worried about impressing someone. And at the end, they ask for the business. I tell my team that if you're waiting to the end to hand them a pen, you've already failed. You ask them for the business in the first 5 minutes.
Yeah. I had a pre-sales guy that if you asked him how much it weighed, he'd tell you what color it was. And I was constantly kind of translating in the meeting. No.
Right.
The weight, not the color.
Right.
But it was just, or they get the people who just say, well, it depends. It's like, that's why you repeat it back for clarification. Oh, so you're a burger guy.
Right.
How do you like your burgers?
Exactly. Ask a question instead of talk, right?
Yeah. Well, I like them big and thick and juicy with all this stuff on them. If that's what you like, I'd look at this one.
Right.
Exactly. Instead of, oh, I'm a chicken person, let me tell you about the chicken.
What's funny, Brian, is he called it a chicken burger. And I was like, really? It was a long day. If we're out having a couple cocktails, enjoying ourselves, I would have been like, tell me more about that. But I was like, yeah, no. I often said, I'll just take a chicken cheeseburger. Thanks.
And have you found anything that just doesn't work in sales that other people think does work in sales?
Yeah, I kind of mentioned it earlier. Creating a robotic structure around how people should go about and do their day. Now, there's certain structure, right, that's needed, right, to build the confidence, get the value proposition down. But everybody does something different. There isn't the top, I'd say, 5 people in the company right now are a little bit different, right? They might be not the best at CRM, but they're really good at closing and having a conversation. Sound right? And the bottom 10% might be really good at CRM, right? And then we're acknowledging the ones that are good at CRM instead of trying to figure out how to get the bottom 10 up to being better closers. I think sometimes we take the eye off the ball on what's important. And if we always think what's best for the patient, what's best for the customer, healthcare, and in this case, in my position, and what will drive revenue, right? At the end of the day, then we make our decisions based off.
And what do you see as a common thing among the B players that if they just really worked on, they would become A players?
I love that question. So, real big fan of loaded questions, Brian. So that I could go on for a long time, but I'll make it really simple. Get comfortable asking uncomfortable questions. The quicker they can get that out and feel confident in how they're asking it, the better off they'll be. And I stress that all the time.
Too focused on being nice instead of being effective.
Yeah, effective is a very
because
very well qualified placed word.
Yeah, because to get people to change, they have to become uncomfortable, no matter what. It's by default.
That at a Tony Robbins seminar a long time ago. Believe it or not.
Did you walk on the fire? Or you break a board, or what you do?
I did. I walked on the fire. I didn't drink the Kool-Aid, Brian, but I did walk on the fire.
Yeah, but it gets you thinking differently. What you thought you couldn't do 1 minute, 2 minutes later, you now know you can do.
Right. And like I said earlier, it gives you the rest of the conversation to recover.
Yeah. Right? And I've never been kicked out of a meeting because I asked a bad question or
never.
No.
Never. And I think that's the confidence piece, right? Of knowing that it's okay. Don't worry about I will tell you this quick story. The hardest sale I've ever had in my life, right? I won't mention his name. He probably wouldn't care. He tells the story when he gets up on podiums, but he argued with me for 2 hours about wanting to return the unit, but knew more than we all did about dentistry. Didn't want to get trained. So I convinced him to allow the training to happen. He is now the biggest advocate for us. And we were at the point where, it's just some words, right? And I was making him uncomfortable. It's like, look, you can't make the decision based off of what you think you know without getting trained to figure out what you will end up knowing. And we're friends now, right? And if I wanted to have that challenging conversation with him, he would have returned the unit, and all the success that we've had in the last 2.5 years would have been gone. And it's being comfortable asking that hard question and pushing them to that envelope. Now he's our biggest advocate.
And I also think it takes an intellect, because it does. You said question, not statement, right? Because a question focuses them on thinking. A statement focuses them on evaluating it.
It's a great point. Just had a coaching call with one of my team members yesterday on that very thing, right? Where they kind of crossed the line, right? And I used that, ask the uncomfortable questions, but it should have been, in that case, not a statement. And that's what they made. It was a statement instead of a question.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because a statement, you're wrong. That's their reply.
Exactly.
A question, they've got to come up with why.
Exactly.
Or what.
And now you know what they're thinking. Right? And honestly, applying this to communication, I've had people that look down on salespeople, right? And I've had those conversations, not a lot of them, but there's some out there. And I've worked for organizations that say, oh, I don't like salespeople. And it's like, that's a shame, because we make the world go around. I'm not trying to pat myself on the shoulder, but I don't know of one organization that can survive without someone selling a product or a service, right? Or a concept, right? And we should always be thinking in that manner, because we should be selling ourselves, right? In our communication. And I think everybody can up their level of communication if they just think that way.
Well, that's it, because those dentists wouldn't voluntarily take a radical or a completely leapfrog technology approach based off of a website or an ad or a webinar.
No, it's a step, right? All we're doing is putting the bricks out in front of them, so when they put their foot down, they have something to stand on. And we're just trying to get them to take the next step, and hopefully that's going north and not south.
Because I think the number one problem is if salespeople act like salespeople and sound like salespeople, instead of
stop selling and start listening,
or start talking at their level, because your reps know more about this stuff than that dentist does.
That's that line in the sand.
right? But if they can talk as peers, and I should hook you up with a guy I interviewed last year in New York City. He works for one of the big dentist distributors.
Mm-hmm.
And he has got this ecosystem down where he just like gets all the dentists together and they talk about the issues. They introduce each other to,
Mm-hmm.
the accountants, the lawyers, the experts in technology.
Uh-huh.
So it becomes much, because when one dentist sees another one work with it, and they go, well, you know, dumber than this guy's doing it.
Uh-huh.
You could do it.
And one of those challenge, I call it an impact statement, back to the asking the questions and challenging their thinking process, is you're certainly not going to be the first person that's bought this product, but do you want to be the last?
Yeah.
Right? Because the last ophthalmologist that said no to LASIX and still said, no, come on in with their scalpel. There's no one in line at that office waiting to get eye surgery done with a scalpel. I can promise you that. Right. So I'm not saying that's what will change this industry, but that thought process will, right? This will become standard of care. It's just the last industry in healthcare standing that hasn't adopted it at a very, very high level. So it's a unique challenge.
And as a leader, what's the hardest part? Is it recruiting? Is it developing? Is it motivating? Is it?
Well, I would say recruiting now because the market's changed, right?
Yeah.
So that's been quite challenging. But leading, no, that's a little bit easier because we have veterans that can lead too. So it's not all on my shoulders. And I'm not saying I'm the only one that leads, right? We have a team of sales leaders. It's really that first 6 months, right? And I try my hardest, and back to the interview process and the personality disorder test, but going with your gut and finding that person that has it in their DNA. I call it their blueprint, right? So if they have a blueprint that says through their life, hey, I was freshman, sophomore, junior year, kept trying out to walk on to the football team, and the head coach kept laughing at me, and I was Rudy though, and I kept trying, right? And finally I had that moment, then that's the type of DNA you want to look for, because especially in this environment, when you have a lot of no's, you have a lot of, I don't really truly understand the value. You have to have perseverance. I typically get asked traditional interview questions, which sometimes make me flat in the interview. Like, I really wanted somebody that's going to just say, look, I can do the job, give me the job. But it's typically, what are the characteristics of that, right? And it's perseverance, it's work ethic, and it's passion. And if you can persevere through all the no's and just be willing to understand and learn why someone made the decision the way they did, why they said no, then I think you got a much better chance. But it's that first 6 months, I think, in most jobs. And they start looking over their shoulder. This is too hard, right? I'm going to go somewhere else where it's easier. That's the shame of it, right? Because sometimes they think the grass is greener and a lot of times it's not.
Well, is it the time to success? Is that 6 months, how long it takes to get your first order?
No, it doesn't. And typically what I'll do to help that is I'll go out there with them and make it, right? If you're a history buff, I'm a big fan of Patton, right? I don't have his ego or roll up my pants like he did, but I really appreciated that he was in the front, right? It's a lot of, memes, I guess you would call them now. Back in the day, we call them proverbs. Now I guess they've become internet memes, and talking about leadership styles. And you lead from the back and coach people about why they didn't check a box, or do you go out in the front and lead with them and show them how to get it done? And I use restaurants as an analogy, believe it or not, Brian, not because it's burger, but because if you've done the job where you've waited the table, you've managed the restaurant, you've run the cashier, you've swept the floors, you understand how the business runs, so you can better articulate to each person working the job. So I try and make sure that I am that person, right? My job title is the janitor, the table waiter, the cashier, the hostess, right? I'm all those things, because if you can understand as much as you can about the business, it helps people with their individual responsibilities.
Cool. Hey, David, I appreciate your time today. Where can people go to connect and follow you? And feel free to pitch any openings you might have.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate that. You can find me, David West, on LinkedIn. And feel free to email me at my work email is dwest@biolays.com. Real simple to find. And just a quick tidbit, since you gave me the window, really appreciate the opportunity today, Brian. I love what you're doing out there and sharing with everybody. From the bottom of my heart, I appreciate it. And I hope people appreciate the time and the communication that we had here, and they learned something from it. And that if there's any dentists that ever listen to this, they give us an opportunity to change their patients' lives, because that's my passion. That's my commitment.